Hey, before we get started with the show, I wanted to remind you that I'm going to be hosting what we refer to as the Post Rehab Summit coming in Scottsdale. That's going to be coming up in April, not February. It's going to be coming up in April 12th and 13th. Okay. Basically, look, what we're going to be talking about is post rehab. Now, our jobs would be much easier if everybody came in perfect condition. Unfortunately, most people have lingering orthopedic issues, aches and pains, muscular imbalances, postural issues. Now, I help a lot of my clients through exercise deal with these issues, whether it's chronic or continuing functional deficit that they've had after completing physical therapy or been released by a physician. Well, it's my job to help them get back to exercising with little or no pain. Someone's going to help you do the same with your clients. All right, we're going to be touching on a lot of things over 2 days: low back pain of all shapes and sizes, knee problems, patellofemoral syndrome, ACL repair, meniscal tear, total knee replacement, hip replacement, impingement syndrome in the shoulder, rotator cuff, tennis and golfer's elbow, all sorts of things. We're going to cover it all. All right, for each condition, you're going to learn specific pathology, simple assessment techniques, contraindications, and safe and effective exercises, including progressions to help you keep your client moving forward. All right. So if you're interested, check out the show notes, or you can go to the website. The official website is thefirmbodypilates.com/post-rehab-summit. Okay. thefirmbodypilates.com/post-rehab-summit. And I hope to see you there. Now, on to the show. Welcome to Moving Conversations, a podcast for movement professionals by movement professionals. If you coach, train, or teach movement, Pilates, or fitness, then this podcast is for you. With more than 60 years of experience in fitness and Pilates, your hosts, Brian Ritchie and Nora St. John, explore the science of human movement, diving deep into the facts, myths, and common misconceptions, hoping to spark thought and conversation about how we view fitness and movement. Now, let's jump into Moving Conversations. And welcome back to Moving Conversations. I'm Brian Ritchie. Joining me as always is Nora St. John. Good morning, Nora. How are you on the West Coast there?
Quite well, Brian. How about yourself?
Doing good. It's been a good week. I'm reassimilating myself pretty well from my travels and being, 13-hour time difference. So I think my body's finally fully reset. It's been a couple weeks and it's like, oh yeah, I think I'm 100%. I think I'm reset. So yeah.
Excellent. It takes a while, doesn't it?
It's a lot longer than it used to. It's like I get about 80% there, and that last 20% takes a little bit of time.
Few days. Yeah.
Yep. Whereas when I was younger, it was sort of like jet lag. What's that? I'm good. I'm ready. And now it's sort of like, okay, I'm about 80%, and it's going to take another week to get that other 20. I know it just is.
Elle and I traveled so much for a long period of time that we just called it lag. It wasn't even jet lag anymore. We were never in an optimum state because, we're traveling like long distances, at least every month or every, 2 or 3 weeks, really. And at some point it's just like, I don't know where I am. I don't know what time zone I'm on. I don't know what my body clock's doing. I'm just going.
Yep. I have a client who was like that for so many years. He was just always on a plane and always somewhere else. And yeah, he said, you never get used to anything. You come home and it's sort of like, I'm here now. Yeah. You just figure it out. You figure out when you sleep, when you need to, and you just move on. Cause he said, you never get used to it. So fortunately I don't travel that much. Travel enough, but not that much. So yeah, jet lag still hits me. So today we want to talk about adductors. Now, we've been talking for a while. We've been talking for a while about the low back for the last, it was kind of funny. We said, we'll do the next 2 or 3 episodes. And then we kept going. And it was like, oh, there's more to discuss. And there's more to discuss. So I said, you know what? We can get back to that. Mm-hmm. We did have someone who reached out to us via our email. And if anybody wants to do that, this just proves we will listen. Trust me. They reached out via our email at movingcombos@gmail.com and said, would you cover the adductors? I'd really like to know more about your take on them, how you train them, what your thought process is when you are training them. And so I thought, interesting, because in fitness land, it's really ignored a lot. So I thought, let's cover this today and talk about that a little bit more. And as always, do us a favor, hit that like and subscribe button on the platform of your choice. We really appreciate it. Leave us a 5-star rating if you can, because that does help the algorithms and all of that goodness. And again, movingconvos@gmail.com or movingconvos at Instagram is probably the best way to see all our, bright smiling faces in our Instagram minis and things like that. So with that aside, let's dive into the adductors.
Ta-da!
Ta-da!
So Brian just mentioned that in fitness land, and again, he's fitness land, I'm Pilates land, or sometimes that's how we talk about it. That's not a negative thing, by the way. We just inhabit different universes that have slightly different perspectives on things and use different tools. Same goals. Venn diagram, a lot of overlap.
There's a lot of overlap between the two worlds.
Right. So in Pilates land, adductors are a major deal.
Yes.
The center line, bringing the legs together, especially if you're coming from a more classical tradition. Everything's done with the legs, the inner thighs smushed together and held in a tight parallel because of that focus on the adductors. If you think about, again, in the Pilates space, the ring, the Pilates magic circle, as Joe Pilates called it, right? That's all about getting that inner thigh connection, getting that midline connection all the way from the big toe up through the adductors, the pelvic floor, and up into the core. And sometimes I would say that sometimes, especially some of the Pilates that we do, doesn't focus enough on the adductors.
Right.
But we still want to talk about the adductors and all the different ways to train them, thinking about open chain and closed chain, looking at isometric versus, concentric and eccentric work. So a bunch of things to talk about. Where should we start?
All right. So there's a lot of places for us to start. I think the anatomy is usually the best way to start, because let's just say when I first got into this industry and you look in the books, they just called them the adductors. They didn't break them down necessarily. And even when I went to pre-med and we looked at everything, it was sort of like they mention each muscle group or each muscle, but then they just, after that one time, they start just referring to them, they're the adductors. And it wasn't until I started it wasn't until I started teaching the anatomy in 3 dimensions that I really was like, wow, each one of these does a slightly different job based on its specific anatomy, based on where it's attached, because each one has very different leverage from one another. And yes, fascially, it's they all sort of smoosh together eventually, but they still are so important individually. So I thought, let's dive into the anatomy first and then go on from there.
Great. So once again, I will just attempt to describe this in words as best as possible, but YouTube will be helpful. I do have a pelvis in my hand, for those of you who are listening, not watching. And so I've got a pelvis in my hand. And what I'm looking at here is, if I look at the top of the pubic ramus, the superior pubic ramus, the adductors attached on the top there. There's our pectineus attaches along the top of the pubic bone, if you want to think about it that way. Then we have our adductor longus and our gracilis, which attach kind of along the front, really along the pubic symphysis. And then we have our adductor brevis and magnus, which cover the bottom, the inferior pubic ramus and the ischial ramus. So basically, you've got they cover the whole front triangle of the pelvis, if you will, on top, in the middle, and on the bottom of that band. So one of the things that always struck me funny was like Brian, when I first learned anatomy, it was kind of like, oh yeah, they attach somewhere on the pelvis. It just didn't really ring. And they all attach, except for one head of the magnus, and the gracilis, they all attach on the middle of the femur in the back. Okay, so they're attaching, at least in upright, from the front of the pelvis, right? If I'm looking at the front of my body, it's the front of my pelvis, but then they wrap around to attach to the back of the femurs, which I just think is interesting, because it's not a very direct angle.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's why is it wrapping around like that? Why is it not just going straight to what we would think of as the inseam of your pants? Right? Why is it just going there? So one of the people I studied with, John Zahorek, who's an amazing anatomy teacher, and did a lot of work with developmental evolutionary anatomy and looking at anatomy on different creatures like quadrupeds. If you take our pelvis and you think about it in a quadruped position, So you take that pelvis and you look like the pubic bone is facing the floor. You're at all fours, right? Then when I put my femur down, I then look at it and I think, oh, look, now those adductors all have a much more direct line to the femur. So they're going straight from the top of the pubic bone around to the femur, from the middle of the pubic bone to the femur, and from the bottom to the femur. And that, when I think about that in terms of function, that means that those muscles are designed to keep that femur tracking, whether it's in flexion, and this isn't a quadruped if I'm crawling, right? In flexion, in neutral, or in slight extension. So it's really designed to keep that femur tracking relative to the pelvis.
Mm-hmm. What's interesting that when you and I have talked about this in the past, and it dawned on me when we were briefing before we started recording, much like the pec major seems to want to bring everything into a position where the arms are directly out in front of the body. They bring it from here to here.
Yes.
It's very similar that when we bring our knees into that 90 degrees in a quadruped position, some of them work better for extension. Some of it, the adductors work better for flexion. Some work for a, pure adduction. But they all work in really supporting and stabilizing, the pelvic or the femoral head into the pelvis. So I just sort of, when we were talking about that earlier, I said, yeah, it really does sort of work a lot like that. And there is a little bit of a twist when we stand up. If you think about where they attach onto the pelvis, some superiorly, some inferiorly, some midline, they sort of have that little twist. But as soon as you go into that neutral state of quadruped, they sort of all untwist. So I found that very interesting.
Yeah. And so when I'm thinking about adductors and again, you've got short ones on the top. You've got the pectineus, which is not very long. You've got the longest, which is longer. You've got the brevis, which is starting to be in the back. And you've got the magnus, which really is in the back. So you've got some hip flexion with your short ones in the front. You've got some hip extensions with your other ones in the back. And then all of them, of course, will bring the femurs towards each other. In different combinations, right? Depending on what position the femur is in. If you're in 90 degrees of hip flexion, they'll work differently than if you're in hip extension at the end of a stride, for example. So just thinking about all of them are working, but they're working differently. Now, what we haven't mentioned, which is the last one I'll mention with a little bit of detail, is the gracilis.
Mm-hmm.
So the gracilis also attaches pretty much to the front of the pubic symphysis. And then goes down and attaches to the medial side of the knee, and is part of our pes anserinus. There we go. Our duck foot, which is this area of fascial connection just underneath kind of the medial epicondyle of the tibia. We're kind of right on the top of the tibia there.
So this is the only adductor that actually crosses that knee joint.
Right. So it causes some knee flexion along with adduction.
Yeah. So I always thought that was interesting when you think about where everything attaches. Like you said, how do we think of this? If you were to draw in someone standing upright, you would draw it on their inseam, because that's literally how people think about it. When I have clients describe to me their inner thigh, they will rub their inseam. They automatically assume that that's where it is, without realizing that it really does go around to more of the posterior aspect of the femur, which I've always found, just fascinating.
Right. And it's one of those things that doesn't seem to make logical sense given how we use it in upright. Right. We use it in upright, and you'd think that it would be more a straight line to that middle line of the femur, that inseam of the femur, if you will, to bring it sideways, but it's not. And again, that's presumably evolutionarily. That's just where things developed because of how we have grown up from being all fours to a standing up person. So a couple of other things about that. One thing is, when I think about how the adductors work as a human, as a standing up human, as a upright person, you think about that, and you think that in all those circumstances, as soon as we're upright, those adductors are guiding around to the back of the femur. And some are more in line with the back of the femur, like our adductor magnus. Others are really in front of that. So they're going to provide some of that flexion, right? They're going to bring the femur forward in our stride if we're walking.
Mhm.
And then they're going to, you shift your weight onto that, you lean over it, and then you tension the front of that femur. This is a little bit like we're talking about the psoas, and that provides a little bit of that spring to bring the leg forward. Hip flexors as well, of course, and there are some hip flexors in the adductors, the pectineus and longus particularly have some hip flexion component. But you can, again, it's another place where you've got that whole anterior hip that tensions as that leg goes behind you. And depending on your speed, like if you're running or jumping or whatever, right, you can tension that and then elastically recoil, bring that leg forward. And those adductors are going to do a little bit of that, but they're going to keep it in line, right? Their job is to keep it in line, not just flex it, but keep it organized around the midline.
Is that why we often see with like groin injuries, when people pull muscles, that I'm not going to say go hand in hand with hamstring, but we will often see a combination sometimes, of that explosive strength when, they're using that hamstring and hip extension. They're really exploding off of it, but it's the leg forward that's catching them when everything's in a stretched out position, that's using that elastic recoil to literally catch them with so much force that it eventually can't hold them up. And, so we see those groin injuries occur then, we see the hamstring injuries occur then. And it's usually closer to the groin than it is the distal end.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And one thing to think about there too is if you look at the hamstrings, right, all three of the hamstring tendons attach onto that ischial tuberosity, that sit bone that you're probably on right now if you're in your car, wherever you are listening. And then the adductor magnus attaches right next to that.
Yeah.
So anytime muscles are that close to each other, there is a relationship. So if you happen to tear your hamstring for whatever reason, you may influence or also irritate the magnus. And if you irritate the magnus, you may also irritate the hamstring, just because inflammation in one area will tend to talk to its neighbors. It likes to share the love.
As I experienced 6 or 8 weeks ago. Yeah, my little muscle tear, and I thought, oh, it's just hamstring, but no, it was actually the adductor magnus that had even a greater tear. And wouldn't have thought that, but that's the way it happened to be. So it was very interesting. I've had a number of clients, believe it or not, who have had groin injuries, tears.
Yep.
10 years ago, 15 years ago, some had surgery, some didn't. And they're still, and one of them in particular calls it her spot. It's my spot. And during a lot of exercises, she said, yeah, I feel my spot. And no matter how strong we get it, it's still a point of weakness for her. So it's just interesting that area, there's a vulnerability there.
Well,
for
whatever reason, for whatever reason, I found that as well. It's like I'm like hamstring tendinosis or hamstring perpetual inflammation at the attachment on the sit bone is really, really common. I've had clients who struggle with that, as you have for years and years. I think we've talked about this before. But the adductors can be part of that as well, particularly the magnus can be a piece of that. I've seen it a little bit more in the front ones, but I've seen it more in the back. I've seen it sometimes in the front, more in the back. Yeah. And again, it's an area that is used every single time you walk. It's not an area that's easy to rest. The other thing I too think about is when somebody has an adductor strain, how does that change their gait? Like typically they lose extension, right? I mean, I always find they kind of like shorten up their gait, they flex the hips slightly and they shuffle, right? That's usually like if somebody comes in like that, I'm like, oh, what did you do? Yep. And so that's another thing is like, what is the protection mechanism for that? It's to go into a little bit of hip flexion and shorten up that gait. So you're not really pulling much into extension on that magnus or that hamstring.
It's interesting you mentioned that, because that's what I even noticed with myself is just walking around my studio. Unless I'm walking with authority and really trying to get from one end to the other really quickly, it's not a gigantic space. So you're not taking long strides and you're not moving quickly. You're just walking with a client. But I found that, oh, I need to go down the street. I need to go to an appointment or a meeting, and I'm running late. And I started walking with more urgency. After about 2 minutes, I started really feeling it. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I'm feeling my hamstring. I'm feeling my adductor. I'm feeling the injury. It's hurting. And it was one of those things I was like, oh, yeah, interesting. And then when I did, like you, I started breaking down my own movement around here, thinking, okay, how is that influencing me here? Yes, I am limping without even knowing it. One leg was not taking as long of a stride. It was just shortening up about half a foot length. I was like, oh, okay. So I had to really work on, okay, take a little longer step, make sure you're working the whole. It was very interesting that for someone like us who were conscious of these things, I was totally caught off guard with it because I've never had any injury like this. So I was like, oh, okay. And you see that with those clients. You see they do shorten up on that side. So it's pretty remarkable how quickly the body will adapt to avoid pain. And if you don't work at it, that can become a permanent, stride or a permanent fixture to their gait.
Well, I mean, as we've talked about with just generally scar tissue and that kind of thing, it's always tricky. And if you give into that limited range of motion, yes, you have to oftentimes for a period of time to decrease pain and inflammation, but you really then have to work back up to full range of motion because you can't let that scar tissue get super, super, super stuck. Like, okay, this is it. I'm not going anywhere, because it will do that. It'll shorten up, it'll tighten up, and it'll decrease the glide of the muscles, it'll decrease the range of motion. So those are things to make sure you're keeping on there. So talking about training the adductors.
Yep.
And a couple things come to mind. One is this is an opportunity to talk about isometric training versus concentric eccentric training or isokinetic training. This is also an opportunity to talk about open chain versus closed chain.
Yes, exactly.
So we've talked a little bit about that. I think we've talked around that at some point in the past, but it's been quite a while. So oftentimes, like I think about, the Thigh Master, you think about the Pilates Magic Circle, you think about a lot of exercises done for the adductors, which are basically putting something between the knees or the ankles or whatever and squeezing and holding, or squeezing repeatedly in a small range of motion. So that is one particular way to strengthen, but what do we know about those kind of small range or isometric strengthening, Brian?
You're not really getting much function out of that. It doesn't translate to functionality nearly as much as doing something more of a closed chain environment.
Right. I mean, also like isometric stuff strengthens within a few degrees. Like isometrics are a great way to get. Right. So you get strength quickly. Like it's actually a very easy way to strengthen something, but only within about 10 degrees of that range you're working. So, that means, you'll get some strength, but that strength will only be useful if I'm holding something between my knees. So, should I be, I'm not sure. I don't want to think really too much about what that might mean or when I might use it.
You'll be able to open a jar of pickles really well. That's all I'm going to say. You'll be able to do that.
Well, I'm thinking my brother, who Brian also knows, was a skateboarder when we were kids. And he would go up, he'd go up and he'd go swimming or whatever, and they'd take his skateboard back home down this relatively steep hill. And so one time he was decided to skateboard barefoot, decided that was a really good idea.
Okay.
So, but he had his shoes with him, but he didn't want to hold his shoes. So he had his shoes between his knees. All right. So he was doing an isometric adductor contraction
the whole time.
Well, until he dropped the shoes, the skateboard hit the shoe, he fell forward and broke his clavicle. Right. So that's the other time. The other time I'm thinking of, like, where you might want to actually really, use that isometric adductor strength. So, right. So again, you can get something there. And a lot of times, like, certainly when I'm working with my clients who are weak there or who have pelvic floor issues post-pregnancy, all that kind of thing, or just a whole weak medial line, like they pronate, maybe they're a little bit knock-kneed and they don't have a lot of strength there. That's a great way to start the process, right? I'll just wake up the muscles, get it going. Yeah. It's just like, come on, muscles, pay attention, get a little bit of endurance here.
And we've all done that. We've all done bridges with a ball. We've all done bridges with the magic circle or various things like
Variations of that, exactly.
And again, to wake the area up, especially if you're trying to influence other muscle groups like the pelvic floor, it can really be beneficial for doing that. Or if I want to do more internal rotation of the femurs, it's a great way to be able to influence that as well, is that you can sort of get all of that sort of in line and organized well through that isometric. But again, like we said, even about core and all these other things, as soon as you stand up and go into a closed chain position, you're really, those muscles are going to be like, you want me to do what now? Huh?
Yeah.
Because they don't know what to do. I think about in the fitness world, yes, we had the Thigh Master, you know, Suzanne Summers, God bless her, man. She made a lot of money on that thing. She made a lot of money hawking that. And a lot of people bought it. A lot of people bought it. And that replicated the machine that I've seen. If a gym is large enough, one of the machines that every single gym will buy is an abductor and an adductor machine where you sit in it and you spread your legs as far apart as you can. And you squeeze and you release, and you squeeze and you release. And it's open chain to a certain degree and closed chain as well, because you're locked into a specific path of motion. So it's kind of an in-between sort of gauge between
thingies.
But it's not that functional. Again, have I used it before? Yes, if I need to wake something up, if I just need to get someone to understand what we're trying to work so that they can feel it, because on something like that, you're going through larger ranges of motion. With a lightweight, you can get them to feel it. And they're like, oh, okay, I see this. Now that I have a reformer, that's my go-to for doing that now. But we're thinking years ago when I was in a gym environment. But that machine is always in use. People always use them. Because women always think that that's how they're going to reduce all of that inner thigh, adipose tissue. And oh my gosh, it's such a waste of time.
Exactly. As you're, well, particularly in terms of function.
Yeah, there's no function with it.
So to take that one step further, I'm going to take it onto the reformer with feet and straps, which is one of my, one of the things the reformer does fantastically. Is one of its real, different than anything else. It does it amazingly. So there, it's like you've got that same idea of working the inner thighs, but you're working in many, many different ranges, because you can do them at 90 or a little lower, a little lower, a little lower. And you're working the hamstrings at the same time. So you think about somebody like you, Brian, who had a hamstring and adductor problem, tear or injury, like that is a great way to get all those different angles.
Yes.
And you're not really working the adductors much except for against gravity. Right? Because there's not resistance really coming direct. There is on the trap table, but not on the reformer. You're not really getting gravity coming straight from the sides. You're getting just, support coming from this direction, and you're pulling that way. But that's still quite useful, and you can get a lot of different ranges of motion out of that. You can work in parallel, you can work in turned out, you can work different angles. You can play with that. So that's a way to take that a little bit to the next step. It still isn't entirely functional, however. Right. But wait, I want to say one thing. When I was at St. Francis, we worked with a running back for the San Francisco 49ers. This was a million years ago, Ronnie Lott, who was a wonderful running back. And he had a groin strain. Not too surprising in a football player, actually, especially a running back. And he had tried a million things. He tried all kinds of things. PT, he did all kinds of training. And he ended up at St. Francis working on the reformer, which was the thing that changed for him. Like that made the difference. And actually that was why reformers ended up in the 49ers training room, was because of Ronnie Lott, like this a million years ago. And what I say about that, because I've worked with many clients with that particular issue with just that exercise, is it's training it in all those different angles. So if there's scar tissue developing, you're breaking it down in all the ways that you will need to make it functional. And you're developing at least a fundamental, functional, foundational level of strength, I'll say, not massive strength, in all the ranges of motion that they might need.
What's interesting is with the reformer, it's sort of my go-to for adductor work, especially for men, because they don't train it, especially if all they've done is squats, or maybe they've done lunges. But squats or a leg presses in fitness world, sort of the go-to for most men. And for me, it's like, okay, we're going to put you on here. And even with a light resistance, it lights them up.
Shaking. They're like,
oh,
they shake all the way up and all the way back. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's definitely a go-to because it wakes up muscles that haven't been firing, haven't been working that specifically in a long time. And you say there's not that much resistance, but for these people who don't have much strength in that area, the resistance, because yes, it's not gravity, but the spring resistance, even without putting a whole lot on there, it can be significant for them and they'll feel it the next day or for several days afterward.
Well, really, I mean, the resistance is your leg weight, which is not
Yeah. Oh,
inconsiderable.
yeah. Oh,
Right.
absolutely.
So it's like, because resistance, because of where the resistance is coming from, most of that's ending up in the hamstrings. So,
Yeah.
if you're just doing a straight inner thigh, you're not getting it, but that's your leg weight. And I've
Yeah.
got clients
Yeah.
who I'm sure their legs are 50 pounds each because they're a,
Mhm.
250-pound guy or whatever. Like,
Yep.
that's a lot of weight to be lifting.
Yep.
So yes, it's not, it's lifting your legs against gravity, which actually can be considerable. You're not
And
just lifting your arms or whatever.
right. What I love about doing it on the reformer too is, again, fitness land. I grew up teaching group exercise. That was one of my first
Mhm.
things. And of course, we learned from Jane Fonda. And to do any adductor work, it was always that short range of motion from
Yeah.
neutral across
To
the
up.
midline to
Uh-huh.
up,
Inside
either
lying. Inside
side
lying.
lying or even if you're standing, you're bringing
Yeah.
it across the body,
Yep.
but there's hardly any resistance in that position. And it's
Yes.
very, very challenging to load that in those positions significantly because they're a very small range of
Mhm.
motion.
Right.
And it's not the most functional range of motion because how often, unless you're a soccer player or a kicker of some sort, you're not coming across the body using your adductors very much, not on a regular basis.
Yeah.
Sprinters maybe, but for general pop, it's really not going to be used that much in that
Right.
range.
Right. I mean, thinking about, so one of the things I love, and I just want to bring this up early in the conversation because I know Brian will have a lot to say about this. Like,
Mhm.
when I think about the adductors functionally, I think about a couple things. One is, for example, like an exercise example, and this is not, you can't really do this too well in the reformer. This is a fitness land exercise. If somebody is standing and I have a TheraBand or a band around one inner thigh,
Mm.
okay, and I'm pulling to the side, and that's going to be their anchor leg. And then, like, let's say their other leg is back behind them, and then they're stepping up onto that leg and going forward. And
Mhm.
then they're going back, and then they're going forward. So they're basically just taking a step in place, back to front, with that resistance of the standing leg adductors. Like,
Yep.
that's functionally, if you think about it, that's how the adductors get used,
Mhm.
right? And they have to have the ability to control and hold that femur in place,
Yeah.
whether that other leg is an extension, moving through neutral and unweighted, or landing in front of them.
Yep.
And so a lot of times when I think about the arc of the adductors and I think about training the adductors, I want to get as much of that whole arc as I can.
Yeah. Yeah. And in that sense, you're really focusing on the stability aspect because you're really trying
Yeah.
to increase the amount of stability that's coming from the adductors. Because when we think about gait, we normally think about the abductors as being the prime mover. The gluteus
Right.
medius really is kind of the
Yeah.
go-to for most people, but
Yeah.
without realizing that you need the balance, you need to come from the adductor group as well. And training it in gait, in that stepping forward and stepping back, just on the standing leg can be huge. I mean, it really can create a lot more stability in someone who may lack that part of the stabilizing leg.
The other thing too, if you think about closed chain versus open chains, this gets a little bit
Mhm.
to that. Now, I've talked about this, or I've certainly talked about, anybody who's trained with me about this in terms of the abductors, that the typical in Pilates abductor exercise in mat is side lying leg lifts, like the Jane
Yep.
Fonda moment, right? Side lying, lift the legs. That's getting the abductors. Yes, it is getting the abductors in an open chain way, meaning the
Yep.
foot is not getting any feedback. Now that creates something, it does,
Mhm.
but my experience over years and years and years has been that does not translate to standing.
Mm.
Like, I would love that to translate to standing. And I realized after teaching, again, a million clients over a million years, saying, I'm going to get the abductor stronger this way, it didn't really work. It just didn't really translate the way I wanted it to. So then I've really had a focus for a long time, both for adductors and abductors, of training them in a closed chain way. So that's why I think about that particular Exercise with the TheraBand is like that closed chain functionality. You can do it turned out. You can do it parallel. You can play with different things. Like, for my dancers, I'll have them in a turnout, like a second position turnout, and a plie, pulling on that leg, and they have to go up and stand up onto that leg and then come back down.
Yes.
Right. So they're starting wide, they're standing up onto that leg and coming back down, up onto that leg and coming back down. Getting that adductor to fire, to pull that pelvis underneath them, pull that femur underneath them, and really create that midline strength.
Yeah, that's a go-to. I literally had a client that I worked with on Tuesday, and we did what I call a step out squat, where you start with your feet together, you step out wide, you squat, you come back to midline, step out, squat, back to midline, and you go back and forth, side to side, alternating sides. She told me the next day, she said, my inner thighs are killing me, and I don't know what we did. And I said, well, if you think about it, that was the only thing we added that was specific.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't have thought that something that simple. Now, she's at a place in her arc of training where that was significant for her. For a lot of people, that would have been an easy exercise, but for her, doing it was fine, but she hadn't been that specific. And I love doing things even like step overs, sideways on a step,
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Or standing on the top of the step down on one side, step back up, step down on the other side, step back up, because it really gets a lot more of those muscles firing than people realize. People think, oh, that's just quads. No, you're working the entire lower body in a very easy way, even on a 4-inch step up. So for an older client, I'm thinking about a client who left earlier today, who's in her late 60s, that's a challenge because she's had knee issues, she's had hip issues. So doing an exercise like that is a very big challenge, but man, does it get results?
Well, and think about not just training, but how we think about our life. Most of us really think about life as being sagittal.
Yeah.
We walk forward, we sit with our legs in front of us, we drive and our arms are in front of us. Unless somebody has trained or thought about it for some time, which some people have, but a lot of people have not. They're focused on moving in that plane only.
Absolutely.
So they haven't usually spent a lot of time even just doing a step side, right? Like a little grapevine or a little sidestepping or a little clock lunge, or, in your case, that nice, squat just to parallel. So they haven't done a lot of that for the most part. And so I find for a lot of my clients, any way that I start to get them stronger, moving out of sagittal, makes a huge difference. And in terms of the adductors, that's really where like another way to do that is a simple, like a, clock lunge, right?
Absolutely.
One leg's there, you go forward, you go to 1 o'clock, you go to 2 o'clock, you go to 3 o'clock, you go to 4 o'clock, you go to 5 o'clock, you go back around. And that also is going to get that stability from really abductors and adductors in concert on that standing leg, and work on balance, work on being prepared functionally for the unexpected, having to suddenly move in a way your body's not used to. So I think thinking about, how do you train the abduction and flexion and extension? How do you train it in internal and external rotation? How do you train it functionally in closed chain? I think those are all key elements.
Yeah, no doubt. And it comes down to balance. And I'm not talking about balancing on one foot. I'm talking about balancing the whole lower leg, because we don't work in isolation very well.
We don't work in isolation, period.
unless you specifically tell it to. Right. Unless you tell it to in a machine, I only want to work this. And even then you're getting a little help from other things. Yeah. But just in functional movement, we have to work everything. We have to move our whole body. So even if I'm trying to train my abductors, guess what? My adductors are firing as well, because they have to stabilize from the opposite side in order so I can train my abductors. So it's really about creating that balance. And I've spent many, many, many hours working on trying to create new exercises and trying to think up exercises to really focus on creating more of that 3-dimensional movement pattern, and maybe creating a little bit of instability. One thing I love for the adductors. And I'm not going to mention, there are many things that we can use in both Pilates land and fitness land. We're not here to sell you anything, so I'm not going to mention that. I'm going to mention something very cheap, and it's a furniture slider. You can use a paper plate. You can use a gliding disc, whatever you want. Something that's going to slide easily. I've used a towel on hardwood floors. I've had clients do that before. But be able to have them stand on one leg, put one leg on whatever that slipperier surface is, and go out into, take that, squat on one leg, but the other leg straight goes out to the side, or out to like 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, 2 o'clock, moving it out to the side in various patterns will affect different parts of the adductor while I'm still strengthening the side that I'm technically lunging on. So I'm getting both sides really well. And it's a great way that I can add that in. And could I use the reformer, or could I use a Coraline, or could I use another instrument? Absolutely. But you can do the cheap route. Use a paper plate. It does work.
Exactly.
Or a furniture slider.
Exactly. And if you're thinking about things clients can do at home,
yes,
you can almost always find some way for them to do something at home. Because in our last session, we talked a bit about client compliance and how to get clients to do homework. And that's just, that's something that with this kind of thing, even a little bit of that makes such a big difference for somebody. And those also can be fun. So not everybody thinks fitness is fun. We all know that. That's one of our challenges. But it's like I know Brian and I both do the things where, okay, I'm going to call out the numbers and you've got to slide your leg to that number, 3, 2, 7, right? So they've got to respond and react. Again, that's a higher level of training. But if I'm training somebody to run, be on the soccer field, or any kind of a running reactive sport, I want to try to get them reactive so they can actually tolerate all those sort of sudden changes of direction and not cause themselves trouble.
And something about doing the clock lunge, another exercise that I have utilized a lot, and depending on what they need, I may want to load them with a light band or something. Have them stand on a stationary leg, and then I call out a number, and they have to reach out with the opposite leg and just tap to 12 o'clock, not stepping forward, but staying on that stationary leg. Now, if I find that they're always turning out, or that their abductors are stronger, then can I put a band around them and actually have them pull in a little bit more on their adductors, provide a little bit of lateral force, just a little. And I'm talking about a light resistance.
Like a yellow band and just a light little pull, just enough so they feel something and have to push against it slightly.
It's a reminder more than anything else. I'm not pulling against anything hard because they have to balance, and they're going to be focusing on take that other foot and tap out to 3 o'clock. And how I do it is I say, I want you to tap as far as you can. So I don't care if it's 6 inches, if it's a foot, 18 inches, because laterally they'll be able to reach further, reverse as well. Stepping forward may be a little bit more challenging. And I say, and all you're going to do is put your foot on top of an egg. You're not touching hard. You're barely touching the ground. So the standing leg is stabilizing like a son of a gun.
Working like crazy. It's all about the standing leg on that one.
Oh my gosh. After 30 seconds or a minute, their foot, their calf, their entire leg is dying. And it really gets them a lot more to that functionality of stabilizing, especially if they're doing a sport or something, because how many times, if you're a kicker, you have to stabilize on one leg. If you're if you're doing skiing, if you're doing anything, you need to have that balance from all areas, and you need to be nice and stable within the entire leg. So that's just another exercise that you can add in for your clients that will work on both stability, but getting that adductor to fire a lot more by just adding a light resistance pulling laterally. It really does make a difference.
So one thing I want to mention is you're talking about that. I'm thinking about one thing, which is important to mention. And that is how the femur sits in the acetabulum and how that changes in flexion, extension, internal, external rotation.
Yeah.
One of the things that I find, particularly, in the Pilates environment, partly because it's so dance influenced, but let's say you're side lying on the Cadillac, in this case, or the trap table, and you've got a strap around your foot. You're doing side lying leg pull down, something like that. And this can also be, this is perfectly replicable in a fitness
Oh yeah.
environment with a band or whatever. So you've got, you're side lying and you're pulling something down. Now, one of the things is everybody's femur is shaped a little differently. Everybody's acetabulum is a little different as well. So
Mm-hmm.
one of the very first things that I play with somebody, if I'm doing an exercise like that, like a side lying leg pull, is I want to find out, number one, what the range of motion is for them in hip abduction, because that varies wildly. And it varies wildly depending on whether they're parallel or turned out.
Yes.
Okay, so like the first thing I want to do if somebody's doing an exercise like that is basically see how far in parallel they can lift their leg. And again, that's why we've got a band on it, because it's supporting them. Or how far can they lift their leg without distorting their hip? So how much actual abduction range of motion do they have there? Because a whole lot of clients will think, oh, I've got to bring my leg like way out here, and the hip will hike and they'll lose their stability everywhere else.
Yep.
So a lot of times I'm just trying to assess, like, what is their actual range of motion there in parallel, then take it into turn out. And again, you've got the straps, you've got some support. How far does that leg go in turned out? It'll usually go far. It'll always go farther, because it just how it changes the mechanics of the hip. But how far will it go? And then does it need to move into flexion? Does it need to, like, how far? It's not going to typically be straight lateral if somebody has a really shallow hip socket and amazing range of motion. Usually going to be in flexion, in turn out, and then come up from there.
Yeah.
So and this is true. So I'm using the example of side lying on the trap table, but the same thing is true if I'm doing a standing side lunge or a standing like rond de jambe and dance, or like putting your leg around in a circle, standing on one leg and circling the other leg. I want to find out how the movement in the hip is possible for them, what's optimum for them. Because if y'all want to stand up for a minute, or if you're sitting and driving, don't do that. But and you're taking that leg forward and you're taking that leg around, it has to change position. So you can kind of do it all in parallel, but it'll change and feel more internally rotated towards the back bit. If I go into external rotation, it'll be an external rotation for the first part till I'm close to, 230. Then it's kind of got to go into internal rotation. It changes its angle to come around, to come to the back. I know that's a lot of fussiness. And this comes from just, a million years of dance background. But understanding where somebody's range of motions are, what their hip mechanics are in flexion, extension, and stepping out to the side can really make a difference in terms of optimizing their strength, decreasing the likelihood of injury, and really managing better hip mechanics for them moving forward. Because a lot of people have the wrong idea. Like, they just think, oh, I should be able to do this way, and everything distorts, and they're going to destroy their hip socket over time. So teaching them what their hip mechanics are can be really helpful too in terms of abduction and adduction.
And also, I think it's wise to be able to teach that to someone, because if they read an article in New York Times or Shape Magazine or wherever they read it, and it says, you should be able to squat to this, or you should be able to do this.
Yep. Or watch something on YouTube.
Or wherever. And it's funny, because if you look at all the various people that we've had in classes, I love to take people and say, okay, I'm going to take these 5 people at random and have them squat. And tell everybody we're going to squat the exact same way and see how different each one is. And then tell them, find what's comfortable for you to go to, let's say, parallel with the floor. Some people turn out, some people are parallel, some people go really wide. Some people, to save their life, can't do it without looking like they're bowing to Mecca. Their whole upper body is parallel to the ground.
Yeah.
And it's all due to their mechanics and how they were born. Their bodies are differently shaped. That's why we can't put everybody in a lump and say we can all do this or we all can't. Some can and some can't. So by displaying what their mechanics are, by breaking that down so that they can even understand it, but also that I'm training my eye for this particular client, because I may see something and be, okay, so when I have her squat, I'm going to have her take her feet out a little wider because she'll be more comfortable, versus this person, man, I have one woman who is internally rotated from her femurs. She was a skier for all of her life, and now she cannot do anything that she's not turned in. So for her, we have to work a lot on external rotation, but everything that we do, she wants to internally rotate. That's just the way she was made, man. And I have to remind myself, okay, she's going to be more comfortable in other positions. Still train the other ones, still train all the angles, but have the understanding that she's just going to be more comfortable here rather than in a different position that 2/3 of my clients would rather be in.
Absolutely.
So we're all individual. And by training, like you said, it's training my eye, but it's also giving them bodily awareness of what their bodies can and can't do. So I think that's very important.
Yeah, just those little corrections make a really big difference. And again, I've worked enough with people with hip issues of all different kinds. And, I can think of one gal who she's a backpacker. She used to lead backpacking trips in the Sierras. That was like her thing. So she's got a 20, 30, 40 pound pack on, and she's hiking on granite for the most part. There's a lot of granite hiking up there. And oddly enough, her hips were not all that happy. And, she was in her, and she was in her late 40s. And, the doctors were like, oh, well, you're headed for hip replacement. And, being who I am, I'm like, well, maybe let's see what we can do. And really, we did just like a massive amount of hip strengthening and stabilizing. Feet in straps. We did some standing work. We did all the things we talked about. She went back to her doctor about 3 months later, and he said, you don't need a hip replacement. And then she was back leading backpacking trips that next summer.
Yep.
And after about basically just 3 months of pretty intensive 3-dimensional hip strengthening.
Bingo.
We worked on all the different angles. We worked on everywhere she could go, finding, and not just the angles, but really correcting the mechanics. So she was never, but never letting her femurs take her pelvis out of whack, or her femurs move out of alignment with where her hips were happiest. Mm-hmm. We just really tightened the box and strengthened within that box. And I think she's still leading hikes today. So, and that's something that both in fitness land and in Pilates land, we don't always work on enough. Like our clients have typically not done a lot of hip strengthening. No. Even dancers have one particular version of hip strengthening, which is helpful, but it's biased typically towards external rotation. Some other players in sports are also working on hip strength, but in certain ranges. And a lot of our clients who didn't ever have any kind of athletic background have no hip strength in 3 dimensions. And adductors are just really key part of how do you develop that. So one thing I'd suggest to you as a trainer is really think about this from a functional perspective for your client. Mm-hmm. What are they trying to do? What are they weak at? What's their environment like? Do they have a lot of stairs? They live in an icy place? Are they a weekend soccer player? Like, what are the things that will really help them to be able to do that? So think about the goals too when training adductors.
And just in general, you and I have spoken countless times about training in all 3 dimensions.
Yep.
It's important not to just stick with just sagittal or just frontal. A lot of people think that, we're working the adductors. So that's the frontal plane. That's going to be just squeezing in and out, either standing or sitting or however you want to do it, lying down. It's like, no. Anytime I rotate, if I'm doing a rotating step up, guess what? My adductor is what's helping stabilize and keep my femur underneath my pelvis as I step up and rotate into it.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
Return back. So working that 3 dimensions, working it in as many ways and shapes and sizes as you can, stepping up and over something, and all these different things that a lot of times we as fitness professionals think, but that looks easy. It's not always easy for our clients. Mm-mm. Most of the time it's very challenging because they don't have the same body awareness to be able to do something like that. So definitely train it from all shapes, sizes, directions, everything. 3-dimensional training is so important, especially to get this muscle firing properly. Yeah.
So let's kind of recap a bit, because I think this is, I've really appreciated the progression, but I just want to kind of wrap it up for our people. So we started a bit with looking at isometric exercises, right? a ball between the knees, a ring between the knees, whatever. And the hips in, maybe they're neutral, maybe they're in flexion, not usually an extension with those, but maybe, and just waking that up, right? Like in the Pilates world, it might be doing something like the 100 with a ring between the ankles, right? So you're getting an inner thigh stretch along with the core, or the inner thigh activation along with the core, or bridging with the ball between the knees, right? Lots of ways to do that. Then we also think about, to Brian's point, our second point, and this would be true with like feet in straps or in fitness land, one of those adductor machines, right? Just waking that area up in a particular range of motion. And if you've got the opportunity to have something like the trap table or reformer, have those adductors work in every possible angle. Obviously, they're not going to go below neutral, so that's important, right? You're always going to just go in flexion and down, but parallel, turned out at 90 degrees if they've got that, working all the way down, really working those adductors in all those different ranges. But that's relatively open chain or semi-open chain, whatever you want to talk about it.
Yep, absolutely,
right?
Absolutely, and taking that finally into much more the dynamic, where they would be standing, closed chain. And again, getting them off of whatever, if they are on the reformer, that's great. But we've talked about this before, get them up, get them standing, do a side lunge onto the arc barrel. If you can do, side step, into a squat position. And most people say, oh, but that's for the abductors. No, it's not. You're working both. You're definitely working both, especially if you return back to the starting position. So hit it from all different angles, all different sides, make it dynamic, make it as dynamic as possible. And then you can load in various positions as well. One of my favorite things that I love to do is put objects at different points around the room and at different heights and all sorts of things. And I'll say, okay, I'm going to call out an object, go get it. So I'll say kettlebell, they have to walk over and I say, now pick it up correctly. Don't just bend over. Then they have to squat and I'll say, carry it to there. Then grab that and move it over to there. Grab that, move it over to there. So they're using their body in space. They're holding onto something. They're picking up something. They're squatting, they're lunging, they're twisting, they're turning, and they're using their body in space, walking all around the room. It's incredible. Instead of just straight lining it, it's at various angles as well. So their body has to rotate and have to move, because guess what? That's real life. And if you're going to be in the garden, guess what? You're going to be doing that with bags of mulch and everything else. So keep that in mind. That's taking it to that next level of functional fitness or functional reality, really, and getting them prepared for daily life.
And I want to break it down even like one step further there. So we start like some closed chain. We talked about things like stabilizing on one leg and moving the other leg, right? Which is really working both legs, but one is more stable. And then what I really liked, and then you've got like, okay, so lean down, pick that up, rotate and put it over here. Pick it up, rotate and put it over there. So working on the adductors also, in rotation. So thinking about kicking a soccer ball, right? And thinking about the wind up and then the release. So adding step by step, progressing them up to more and more dynamic functional activity is really where we want to go with the adductors. And again, this is the full arc. Brian, I've talked the full arc. Some clients start 7 steps along that arc. Some start at 0.
And only go to number 3 for 2 years.
Exactly. And some get to number 3 and some get to number 20. It's like just understanding where those arcs are, and they're all valuable, like they're all useful. Finding where your client has that mobility, where they've got the strength, where they need it, and then working that range. I also just want to say, work it consistently enough to make a difference for them.
Yes.
Because it's easy for us to get bored. And I say that to clients or to teachers all the time. Our clients, some of them will get bored, but that's not the usual thing. Usually they're pretty good to do whatever you want them to do. And if you change it up just a little bit, that they won't really realize they're doing something not very different than they did last week, but now, it's orange instead of green. So, so really think about these things being consistent, legs particularly, consistent, long-term process, because endurance is part of what the legs have to do.
Yes.
It's not a short term, like I just got to do 2 rep things here. It's a multiple rep things.
Yeah. And I love that you covered that. Be consistent. We will become bored much more so than your client will, because if we've seen 8 clients today and every single one of them did a version of a row, guess what? Tomorrow I'm sick of rows. But guess what? for posture, for all sorts of things. It's an incredible exercise, and I should probably continue doing it with those clients. So
Exactly.
again, it's about the client in front of you. Be consistent. I love that. And again, just adding a little spice here and there can make all the difference in the world. You know, just adding a little bit of change. You don't have to change the whole exercise. Just a little bit can make a world of difference.
Yeah, love it.
Awesome. Awesome. Now I'm going to put a challenge out there to our listeners. Do us a favor. Okay. When you see us on Instagram, or if you want to just hit us up on movingcombos@gmail.com. What's your favorite? What's your favorite adductor go-to exercise? Because we said ours. We said things that you and I have done. But again, we are limited to the clients we see, what we've done in the past and whatnot. I love learning from other people. And I love when I teach classes and someone will bring a new exercise to me. I'm like, oh, I'm stealing that. I love that. And so do us a favor, hit us up. Let us know, what is your favorite exercise? Because I would love to be able to utilize it when we do our next batch of Anatomy Minis and Moving Combo Conversations video versions, where we can share some of these exercises and bring it to the masses. And we'll definitely call you out and say, hey, this is from so-and-so from such and such. So please do us a favor. Hit us up. We'd love to hear from you. And we covered a lot today.
We did. Good. Yep. Hopefully you guys can go out and do some adductor work. That'll be your goal for the week. Think about adductors for the week.
Absolutely. I'm already thinking. I'm like, yeah, I got to start adding a little bit more in myself. So yeah.
Me too. I know. I'm like, I got some things in my head. Like, I know what I want to add.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, thank you guys for joining us. We really appreciate it. As always, you can hit us up on email or Instagram. We really appreciate it. And do us a favor, hit that like and subscribe button. It all makes sense to those algorithm, genies out there. Not to me, but it makes sense to them. So we really appreciate it. And we will see y'all next week. For Nora St. John and Brian Ritchie, we'll see you later.
Bye, guys.